This is why the girls were quite immature for their age and would throw tantrums publicly if Gina and my dad didn't buy them what they wanted or if things wouldn't go their way. I was an introvert and completely opposite to them, so I would sit silently and watch them embarrass themselves. After a year of dating, they decided to get married when I was 12 and even my mom attended their wedding. I was so happy that I had a new member in our family who would also be there for me. I thought me and my stepmother were getting along until I think a few months after their honeymoon. She told me while we were alone one morning that she didn't really like me, and that we just needed to pretend to like each other for my dad when he was around. She continued to tell me that whenever my dad was not there, I should not bother her since she hated seeing my face, which reminded her so much of my mom. My tiny heart broke hearing her cruel words. I did not expect her to say something like that. I genuinely liked her and thought that our relationship was going to be okay, but alas, she did not see me that way. The twins, of course, heard her say this and they would later tease me about how I didn't have a dad and how my dad loved them more than me. I remember crying and telling mom about this, who immediately called up my dad and gave him a hearing. My dad assured her that there was no way that stepmom would have said something like that to me and that I might have misheard her. The next weekend when I came to meet my father, my stepmother seemed pissed. She didn't say a word in front of my dad, but as soon as he had left, she furiously whispered to me about how she was going to make sure that I would not have a dad left in my life if I ever told my mom anything about her. She also threatened me that she would divorce my dad and take away all his money. So if I didn't want to see my dad living on the streets, then I should keep my mouth shut. I was just 12 years old, and I was frightened for my dad, so I just nodded my head in agreement. From that day forward, Gina made it her personal mission to make my life hell in every way possible. And because I was a child, I thought I would have to take it with my mouth shut. Whenever it was just me and stepmother, she would say things to get to me and I would just not say anything, hoping and praying that she would stop bullying me. She would talk about my height, my weight, and would say how ugly I was. I hoped my dad would notice, but he never did. In fact, he thought Gina and I had a good relationship and would force me to go shopping, eating with her and the kids. She would take my dad's car to pay for our meals, yet she would not let me eat anything in the restaurant. I was only ever allowed to have soup or dessert, but no main course. I would sit miserably watching them finish off the main course while crying quietly. Miserably watching them finish off the main course while crying quietly. I would then come back home hungry, and she would then force me to go to bed hungry. There have been so many nights when I would cry myself to sleep hungry and tired of her hate towards me. At that point, I was at my wit's end, scared, angry, and frustrated with both my stepmom and my dad. This is why I would dread visiting my dad during the weekends and whenever it was Friday evening. I would try to escape visiting my dad by coming up with excuses like stomachache so I could stay over with my mom. Of course, my parents started noticing this, and my dad would call and tell me about how sad he was for not getting to see me. My mom would urge me to tell her if something was wrong, but I would always keep my mouth shut, still scared of Gina's threats. When I was 14 years old, my dad decided to take his entire family and me on a trip to Greece. Initially, I did not want to go, but my mother told me that this was a good opportunity for me to travel and experience the world, so I begrudgingly decided to join them. As usual, Gina pretended to be all sweet and kind in front of my dad, hugging me and asking me about school as if she was genuinely interested in my life. One thing I started noticing was that she would subtly tease me in her sweet voice, which was insulting to me. But at the same time, it would not outrightly portray her as being mean. For example, when I talked about how I was playing basketball, she would make jokes about how I should be taller if I wanted to play that sport even though I was quite tall for my age, and would then say how I should concentrate more on studies rather than sports if I ever wanted to be something in my life. The twins would then smirk and call me names like meathead even though I had better grades than them. My dad would notice this, but would choose to ignore it. Whenever I would voice out that what she said made me uncomfortable and hurt, my dad would insist that she was just teasing and that I should lighten up. Gina would nod her head and tell my dad how I had no sense of humor and that I should have fun just like she did. This continued to happen throughout the vacation, and one day in a moment of anger when she and the twins were teasing me yet again about my weight while I was trying to enjoy the pool, I decided to be vindictive. I told the twins straight to their faces about how they both had double chins, which was embarrassing, and I watched their faces fall. I then turned to look at Gina and told her that she should not be wearing a shrug over her bikini because I could still see her huge stomach protruding out, which made her look like a penguin. I watched Gina's face turn red in embarrassment, and she got up to run back to the hotel room. The twins started yelling at me for being sexist and saying how I was horrible to say this about them. Later, they told my dad and he came to talk to me, clearly pissed. He asked if I had really talked to my stepmother and stepsisters that way, and when I nodded, he went on a rant about how he raised me better than this and how I should never talk to a woman about her weight. I argued back that they were talking about my weight, my looks, and my height, yet my dad forced me to apologize to Gina, who apparently had locked herself in the bathroom crying after what I had told her. She and the twins made a big show about accepting my apologies. When I returned back home, I of course told my mom about all of this, and she again talked with my dad, who was trying to blame me for everything, but my mother threatened that if Gina ever commented about my weight or looks, then she would call CPS on my father. This scared my father straight, and I don't know how, but Gina never said anything to me after that. Of course, she and the twins would blatantly ignore my presence whenever my dad wasn't around, but honestly, I was fine with that. During the time when I was 16 years old, my mom was away for a few days. I had to stay with my dad and Gina. Gina had been complaining to my dad for a few days about how she hated cooking for one more member.